This is a quick video to demonstrate a few grading techniques in Lightroom. First of all, we're going to import some files, and these will be raw files. You'll notice that they're all checked, and come down to the bottom right and click on Import. They've now appeared in the library section. You can do some basic adjustments over here on the right, but we're going to go straight to Develop at the top. The first image has been taken with an ND filter, and it has brought down the highlights, but I still want to do some more work to it. So we'll start with having a look at our white balance, and it's a little blue, this picture, for me, so I'm going to bring up the temperature a little bit, and that's warmed up the pond and the grass around about there, I think. The sky looks a bit pink, so I'm just going to bring that down a bit. Now what's happened is the bottom half's gone quite green, so I think let's concentrate on the pond and this area here. So I think about +5 is good for me. The exposure's fine, I'm quite happy with that. But what I want to do is sort out this sky at the top here. Now there's a couple of tools that we can use. We've got a brush tool and we've also got a filter tool. Because I've used a filter, I'm going to actually use filter in here. So if we look halfway across, we've got this rectangle. Click on there and you'll see that there's a load of settings in here. Before we make any adjustments, I'm just going to draw the area that I want to filter. So I'm going to start around about there and just drag down. You can see 3 lines. Now that's going to be strongest at the top and weakest at the bottom. So I want this to end at the pond. What I want to do is just sort the colour out in that sky. For me, it's a little bit too pink. So let's just bring the green down. There we go. And we can make it bluer or we can make it warmer. Now I quite like blue just to bring a bit more mood into that. I'm also going to bring this down a little bit to the horizon. Something else that I want to change is the contrast. Let's just bring that up a bit. There we go, there's a bit more intensity. Now the shadow's a little bit too dark for me, so I'm going to bring those up. And the whites we're going to take down. We've also got highlights. Now highlights will affect this area here. Now I don't want to do that too much, but just enough to bring some detail back. The other thing I want to do is lower the saturation to make it grayer. And there, I'm quite happy with that. That's a fairly balanced image. This is what I usually start doing first before I grade and change certain areas. One thing I want to do is just bring up the detail in all of this dark area here, and we'll use this brush tool. And what we would do is just bring up our exposure a tiny bit, and if we now scroll down, you should see this brush tool at the bottom. We've got auto mask already selected. We've got the size here, which seems about right for the trees that I want to edit. And we've also got feather on. Feather stops it being such a harsh brush. One thing I do want to do is turn on my selected mask overlay, which is on the bottom on the left. Now when I draw, you should see the mask, so I know which bits that I'm selecting and which bits I'm not. The reason I'm not going on to the white areas is because we've got this auto mask selected. So that tells me then that I will only affect anything that's black or dark. Let's turn off the mask so we can see what we're affecting. Scroll back up to the top. And we can bring our exposure right up and see it's only affecting the trees. A bit more contrast in there. Let's make them a touch warmer. There we go, and a bit greener. And we're just going to bring out the black areas just so it's not so dark. Right, that image is much more balanced and I'm quite happy with that now. Okay, let's move on to the church. This image has got quite a lot of contrast in it. A filter hasn't been used, and consequently the sky has gone overexposed. It's also a little bit blue, so the two things we're going to correct in here are the colour temperature and bring that sky detail back. So the first thing I'm going to look at is the colour. Let's click off the brush and we'll reveal the normal tools. So if we just bring this temperature up, okay, so it's a bit more sunset looking, and again around about 6,000. So the purple tint is set a bit high, so I'm going to bring this down. There we go, and a bit more colour. I'm fairly happy with that. We're going to scroll down and just adjust the highlights and shadows a little bit. So highlights we're going to bring down. This should darken the sky. Shadows I'm going to bring up a bit. Whites down a tiny bit, and blacks up a tiny bit. You don't want to overdo this, otherwise it turns into a bit of a HDR image and it can go a bit too far. Now I want to darken the sky down and bring out the detail in those clouds because it's a bit too bright. So let's select our brush Our exposure we're taking down to 0.5 or half. And if we scroll down, auto mask is still on. The density, I'm going to want this up to 100% because I want to make sure we cover everything on the sky. The brush size I'm going to turn up a little bit, and we'll leave feather and flow at 100. Let's make sure that show selected mask overlay is turned on because I want to see where I'm drawing, and let's start pasting. There we go. And we can see all the sky is now turning red. This is just the mask. We're not actually painting red on the picture. Right, I've done a fairly good job there. The only thing is I have just gone over those bushes, so we're going to erase that. So click on the right here at erase. Let's turn this brush down a little bit smaller. Make sure auto mask is selected. I think we can need a bit smaller. And let's paint over the bushes. There we go. So that's taken that off. I'm not bothered about that tree for the moment, so I'm going to leave that here. Let's get back to the building. There we go. That's fine. Okay, so that's good. I'm going to turn the overlay colour off so I can see what effect I'm having on the sky. That's already darkened it down a bit, so I'm going to come into here. If you select in and press the down arrow, it just makes it darker incrementally. So I quite like that now. There's quite a lot of detail come back out of that sky. This doesn't look so clever here, so we'll sort this out in a second. I'm going to bring my contrast up a tiny bit, so we're going to bring the whites down because they're quite bright here. We have got shadows that we can raise, and we've also got blacks. If we bring the blacks up, can you see the tree has lightened, but it's also lightening the sky, so we don't want to do that much. Okay, let's sort this out here because it's a bit ghosty. And to do that, we click on here, select A, bring that down a bit, and as I brush in here, there we go. We can see that we're repairing that there. Fine. Now I quite like that. That's good enough for me. I think it could probably do with a bit of a vignette on. So we'll turn that brush off. And if we scroll down, we've got other tools in here as well. So it could affect our exposure, but it's fine. I don't want to touch the contrast that much. Highlights and shadows we've done. Now in presence, you've got texture. And you can see it just brings out a little bit of sharpness in the middle there. Clarity. Clarity adds a mid-tone contrast, which doesn't always work well. Dehaze adds in a bit of contrast and saturation. I'm just going to turn these back because I don't like them that high. Vibrance brings out the colours in the middle, so we can take the colours right the way up and right the way down. I'm going to leave them just at plus 13. Again, saturation enhances all of the colours, not just the mid-range. And if we scroll down, we've got tone curve, and we can add a classic shape, which is the S. That adds a lot of contrast, but I don't really like that, so I'm going to turn that off. If you're not sure about what you've done, click this, and that turns that effect off. Just that little button there. Okay, next we've got Hsl and Color. We can affect all of these greens here by selecting the yellows and the greens. This is saturation. We can change the color slightly, make the grass a bit greener, a bit yellower. We're going to turn that off because I quite like the colors the way they are. Okay, if we come down, we've got color grading. Again, we can affect certain areas. So we've got midtones, shadows, highlights. If we look at the midtones, this is all these colors and tones here, and we will darken them down and brighten them a little bit. We can make them bluer, more orange or pink. I'm going to leave that alone. Shadows will be the dark areas here around the tree. So we'll make that a little bit more red and a bit more orange. Come around to blue. And finally, the sky with highlights. We can make green, blue, purple. You don't have to go all the way to the edge. You could just add a tiny bit of colour and bring out the detail where you want it to. Right, we're going to leave that there. Next in detail is sharpening. This is fairly sharp, so I'm not going to touch it, and I'm going to leave it set to where it was. If your image is a bit noisy, you can bring the noise reduction up. Lens corrections, chromatic aberration, profiles for various lenses. You can put your lens make and model in, and if there's any problems with it, it just corrects the look. It might be a bit of vignetting, a bit of distortion, and it's quite a useful area to use. Now, transform is for distorting the angle of the image, and we can change the aspect. We can rotate it, scale. There's quite a lot you can do in here, but I'm going to undo this because I don't want any of this. Undo is Command Z. And finally, we can add a little bit of vignetting. Pushing to the right, we'll add a white vignette, a bit like an old-fashioned postcard. And to the left, it darkens it down. That's a little bit too strong for me, so I'm going to change the midpoint by bringing it out. the roundness to make it a bit softer, and feather this quite a lot. Next, we're going to look at HDR. This cross has been photographed into the sun. At the moment, it's a silhouette. It's quite dark and the sky is still bright, but it's amazing how much detail you can pull out of a raw file. So before we do anything, let's scroll back up to the top. I'm just going to adjust the color a little bit to bring that up a bit warmer. That's 7,000. And we're just going to concentrate on the highlights and shadows. If we bring our highlights all the way down, this is the white and the light areas. You can see all that details come back into the image. Let's bring the whites down a little bit because that's where we've lost a lot of detail around the base of the cross. And next we're going to increase our shadows. Shadows are all these bits. They're the dark tones in your image. So let's bring shadows up. Okay, even at 50, that's balanced that image. If I go to 100, you can see it looks a bit too much. The HDR effect of this is overblown. And the same if I bring up the black areas. It's just too much. But it's still amazing how much detail you get out of that one image. No flashes used or anything. We're going to bring that down to around about 70. Quite like that now. What I want to do is add a bit of contrast to this image, but not to the whole scene, just to the cross and a little bit of the grass. So again, we're going to use our brush tool. If we click on here, set exposure to 0, we don't need to brighten it, and contrast, we're just going to type in 10. You can use the sliders if you want. This is what you'll find with raw editing software, that it's non-destructive. It's just a case of moving the sliders until things look the way you want them to. And because you don't destroy the image, you can just keep going at it until it looks right. So we're now going to select our brush. We want a smaller brush than this. There we go. And if we turn the mask overlay on, and as carefully as you can, try to draw around the whole of the cross. Right, that's not too bad. Take a bit more time when you do your own. I can see that the contrast hasn't taken that much effect, so I'm going to bring this up a lot more. And I've still got control over the shadows in here. There we go. Bit more contrast. And I'm going to take the blacks just down a bit. Right. Okay, that's pretty good for me. The last thing I want to do is crop this. So I'm going to click on here. And I'm going to bring this up to about there. And select done. Perfect. Lastly, we're going to look at colour balance in this nighttime scene and correcting the converging verticals. First thing to do is get our white balance correct. Let's bring that up. What I'm looking for is making sure the grass and the church look okay. Now they are lit with orange light. There we go. I think 8,000 because it's nighttime. Do we need more pink? Nope. And we're going to use the brush tool again. Turn the overlay on. Make sure that our brush is fairly large. Auto mask is selected again. Brush around the church. There we go. Right. Turn that off. Now I'm just going to bring the colour temperature down on the sky. That's nice. And I like adding a tiny bit of green into my skies. Just makes them feel a bit more natural for me. Because this is a nighttime, I'm actually going to add purple. And a little bit less blue. There we go. That feels more of a nighttime shot. Okay, let's come off the brush. Something else that you can do is come back down to the Hsl Color. And let's just affect the blue on its own. If we're in hue, we can take the aqua down or bring that up. And with the building, we can bring that down to make it a bit more orange. And with the grass, click on green. And I think we're going to have a little bit of a bright green. And lastly, we shall affect our converging verticals. If we scroll down to transform and just tilt that back that way, just rotate that a tiny bit. A bit more. The church looks a little bit flat and squashed to me. So I'm going to change my aspect ratio and moving it to the right, gives it a bit more height, and we will crop. And that's done. And if you want to see what effect you've had on the image, go down to the bottom left, you can see the double Ys. Click on the arrow to the right, and you've got all of the options that you can choose from. So left to right, click on this again. Now we've seen what we did before, we'll go back to the edited image. If you want to export all of these images, just select all four, come up to File, and Export. This brings up this box, and we can choose to export to desktop. We can choose to rename the files. We can choose the different settings and the quality. We can choose the size. Let's Put that at 300. If you want to add sharpening and watermarking, you can do. And then click on export. And that's it. Lightroom.